Hi boys and girls, today we're going to be reading chapter 18 of The Thief of Always. So we last left off the last chapter. Harvey has decided to go back to the Holiday House with Wendell. Wendell's kind of fallen under the traps of the Holiday House again, and what just happened is Harvey went inside the house. He talked to Rictus and Jive and kind of convinced them that he missed the house so much and that he had to come back. And he just went downstairs because Stu Cat led him to this downstairs basement almost and he thinks he's found Mrs. Griffin in this coffin and is trying to get her out. So this is chapter 18 called The Bitter Truth. He almost shouted out loud, seeing the terrible state that poor Mrs. Griffin was in. She was staring up at him with wild eyes, her hair pulled out in clawfuls, her face purple with bruises. A foul rag had been stuffed into her mouth. Harvey carefully removed it, and she began to speak, her voice a hoarse whisper. "Thank you, my sweet, thank you," she said. "But oh, you shouldn't have come back. It's too dangerous here. Who did this to you?" "Jive and Rictus." "But he ordered it, didn't he?" Harvey said, helping her up. "Don't tell me he's dead, because I know that doesn't matter. Hood's here in the house, isn't he?" "Yes," she said, holding on to him as she climbed up out of the box. "Yes, he's here, but not in the way you think." She began to weep, the tears clogging her words. "It's all right," Harvey said. "Everything's going to be all right." Her fingers went up to her face and touched the tears. I thought I'd never cry again," she said. "Look what you've done." "I'm sorry," said Harvey. "Oh no, my sweet, don't be sorry. It's wonderful." She smiled through her tears. "You've broken his curse on me." "What curse?" "Oh, it's a long story. I want to hear." "I was the first child who ever came to Hood's house," she said. "This was many, many years ago. I was 9 when I first walked up the front path. I'd run away from my house, you see." "Why?" "My cat had died, and my father refused to buy me another. And what do you think Rictus gave me the very day I arrived?" 3 cats, said Harvey. "You know how this house works, don't you?" Harvey nodded. "It gives you whatever you think you want." "And I wanted cats and a home and..." "What?" "Another father." She shivered with fear, remembering the horror. "I met Hood that night. At least I heard his voice." Stu Cat had come to her feet, and she paused to stoop and gather the creature into her arms. "Where did you hear him?" Harvey said. "In the attic at the top of the house. And he said to me, 'If you stay here, forever and ever, you'll never die. You'll grow old, but you'll live until the end of time and never weep again.'" "And that's what you wanted?" "It was stupid, but yes, I did. I was afraid, you see. Afraid of being put into the ground like my cat." A new wave of tears came running down her pale cheeks. "I was running away from death." "Straight into its house," Harvey said. "Oh no, child," Mrs. Griffin said. "Hood isn't death." She wiped away her tears so as to see Harvey more clearly. "Death is a natural thing. Hood isn't. I would welcome death now, like a friend I'd driven away from my door. I've seen too much, my sweet. Too many seasons. Too many children." "Why didn't you try and stop him?" "I have no power against him. All I could do was give the children who came here as much happiness as I knew how." "So how old are you?" Harvey asked her. "Who knows?" she replied, laying her cheek against Stu Cat's fur. "I grew up and old in a matter of days, but then the passage of time seemed to lose its hold on me. Sometimes I've wanted to ask one of the children, 'What year is it in the world outside?' I can tell you." "Don't," she said, putting her finger to her lips. "I don't want to know how the years have flown. It would hurt too much." "What do you want then?" "To die," she said with a little smile. "To slip out of the skin and go to the stars." "Is that what happens?" "It's what I believe," she said. "But Hood won't let me die, not ever. That'll be his revenge on me, for helping you to escape. He already had Blue Cat murdered for showing you the way out. Hood's going to let you go, Harvey said. I promise. I'm going to make him. She shook her head. You're so brave, my sweet, she said. But he won't let any of us go. There's such a terrible emptiness inside him. He wants to fill it with souls, but it's a pit, a bottomless pit. And you're both heading for it, said an oily voice. The speaker was Mar. She was oozing down the stairs. We've been looking for you up and down, she said to Harvey. You better come with me, child. She extended her arms in Harvey's direction. He remembered all too well her transforming touch. Come, come, she said. I might still get you out of trouble if you let me make something humble of you. He likes humble things, does Mr. Hood. Fleas, worms, scabby dogs. Come to me, child, quickly. Harvey looked around the cellar. There were no other ways out. If he was to get Mrs. Griffin up into the sun, it had to be by way of the stairs, and Mar was standing in front of them. He took a step in her direction. She smiled toothlessly. Good, child, good, she said. Don't, Mrs. Griffin said. She'll hurt you. Hush, woman, Mar said. We're going to have to nail that lid down next time. Her greasy green eyes swiveled back in Harvey's direction. He knows what's good for him, don't you, boy? Harvey didn't reply. He simply kept walking toward Mar, whose fingers seemed to be growing like a snail's horns, reaching out to fix upon his face. You've been such an obedient boy, Mar went on. Maybe I won't turn you into a worm after all. What would you like to be? Tell me what's in your heart. Never mind, my heart, Harvey said, reaching out toward Mar. What about yours? A puzzled look came over Mar's face. Mine? She said. Yes, said Harvey. What do you dream of being? I never dream, she said defiantly. You should try it, Harvey told her. If you can change me into a worm or a bat, what could you do for it yourself? The defiance on her face became bafflement, and the bafflement turned to panic. Her outstretched fingers began to retreat into themselves. Harvey reached for them like lightning, however, interweaving his fingers with hers. What do you want to be? He said to her. Think! She started to struggle, and he felt her magic surging through her fingers into his, attempting to work some change on him. But he didn't want to be a vampire bat anymore, and he certainly didn't want to be a worm. He was quite happy to be himself. The magic, therefore, had no hold on him. Instead, it flowed back into Mar, who began to shake as though she were being dipped in icy water. What are you doing? She demanded. Tell me what's in your heart, he said, returning her invitation. I'm not telling you, she replied, still trying to wrest her fingers free of his. But she was not used to having her victims resist her this way. Her muscles were soft and flabby. She pulled and pulled, but she couldn't escape him. Leave me alone, she said. If you harm me, Mr. Hood will have your head. I'm not harming you, Harvey replied. I'm just letting you have your dreams, the way you let me have mine. I don't want them, she yelled, struggling more than ever. He wouldn't let her go. Instead, he drew closer to her, as if to wrap her up in his arms. She started to spit at him, great gobs of slime, but he wiped them from his face and kept approaching her. No, she began to murmur. No! But she couldn't keep the magic she'd intended for him from working on her own skin and bones. Her fat face began to soften and run like melting wax. Her body sagged in its ragged coat, and a greenish gruel began to pour out onto the floor. Oh, she said. You child. What dream this was, Harvey wondered, that was turning Mar to mush. She was growing smaller all the time, her clothes dropping off of her as her body shrank, her voice becoming thin. It could only be moments before she disappeared altogether. What do you dream of? Harvey said, as Mar's fingers ran away between his own like brackish water. I dream of nothing, Mar replied, her eyes sinking back into her disintegrating skull. And that's what I've become. She was almost lost in the folds of her clothes. Nothing, she said again. She was no more than a dirty puddle now, a puddle with a fading voice. Nothing. Then she was gone, devoured by her own magic. You did it, Mrs. Griffin said. Child, you did it. 1 down, 3 to go, Harvey said. 3? Rictus, Jive, and Hood himself. You're forgetting Carno. Is it still alive? Mrs. Griffin nodded. I'm afraid I've heard its shrieks every night. It wants revenge. And I want my life back, Harvey said, taking her by the arm and escorting her, still carrying Stu Cat, to the bottom of the stairs. I'm going to get it, Mrs. Griffin. Whatever it takes, I'm going to get it. Mrs. Griffin glanced back at the heap of clothes that marked the place where Mara had vanished into thin air. Maybe you can, she said, with astonishment in her voice. Of all the children who have come here, maybe you're the one who can beat Hood at his own game. And that is the end of chapter 18. Okay, so today I want to talk about theme. So I know this is something that we're super familiar with, and we know that the theme is the life lesson that the characters are learning, that the author wants us to kind of take away and apply to our own lives. So before we dig really far deep into it, we kind of have to think about how do we create a theme, okay? So where do we start from when creating a theme? Well, first, what I like to do as a reader is I like to start and think about what problems or issues has the main character faced to where they learn from them eventually, okay? Or decisions that the character has made where they might regret them in the end or wish they hadn't made those decisions to begin with. So I'm going to start with kind of backtracking and thinking about the decisions kind of Harvey made throughout the story that's kind of led us up to this point. So I'm going to think about our first problem. Actually, I'm not going to use this pen. So our first decision that Harvey made was that Harvey was bored at home and school, and nothing pleased him or entertained him. Okay, kind of thinking about another problem or decision that Harvey made was, I'm going to say that Harvey was kind of blindsided by all the gifts and magic of the holiday house. Harvey gave in to the magic and gifts the holiday house had to offer. Third problem, trying to think of the big pictures, like what are these big decisions that ended up affecting Harvey? So for him to kind of give in to the magic and gifts, he was blindsided that entire time, and he was kind of blind to everything that was actually creating the house and making the house what it was. He didn't actually know that there was really anything bad that it had to offer until he was completely kind of invested into the house. Third problem was that, I'm just going to be kind of generic with it. He lost Lulu almost as a fish and lost 31 years with his parents. Thinking about if there's any more like big problems that Harvey has to think about up until this point. Well, we're kind of there. So we've kind of made our way back into the holiday house. So I'm going to kind of think about, look at these problems and see what has Harvey learned from all of these things that he's had to deal with. So what did he learn by being bored at home in school? He was nothing pleased him, nothing entertained him. This now led him to this holiday house where there was a bunch of magic and gifts being given to him from the holiday house. And he was kind of blinded to all the negative and bad things that the holiday house actually was made up of. And the third was that I said he lost Lulu as she became a fish. And while he was at the holiday house, he lost 31 years with his parents, which is a huge deal to him. And he wants all of those years back. He kind of wants to get he had karma. So he's kind of giving the karma back, as you could say, to the people at the holiday house, besides Mrs. Griffin. So a potential theme. So what are we thinking that Harvey is slowly starting to learn? He wished to have this magical place and to go somewhere crazy, this magical place, and he kind of regretted going there to begin with and wishing these things. So I'm going to kind of just stir up some ideas like be happy with the life you have. Maybe there are more important things than like gifts. I'm going to say kind of like treasures. Maybe like what you need might be right in front of you and you might not realize it. Maybe like, don't wish away the great life you already have. So those are just some ideas. And then as we continue to finish the book, because we're getting really close to the end, we only have 7 more chapters, we can kind of start to develop that concrete theme, the overall main theme from this book that we can apply to our own lives. And hopefully you've started to think about these poor decisions that Harvey had been making in the beginning of the book, and now he's kind of trying to make up for those bad decisions that he made. Hopefully it turns out in his favor, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed for him, because I think he's turned around and become a really good character worth fighting for. So I hope you enjoyed that chapter, and we will be back tomorrow with the next chapter, which is chapter 19, which is called Dust to Dust. And if you remember, Harvey has told us what dust is and why it's important, and has to do with the holiday house. So try this homework with your own fantasy text. Try to transfer kind of developing those themes. So think about what are the problems or bad decisions that your character has made in the book, and then start to see, okay, what is the lesson that the character has started to learn? Kind of go from there, okay? Thank you, guys.